Hi there. Today I'd like to do a landscape painting and show you a little bit about how I go about using some of the features in Rebelle 5. My name's Pete Smith and welcome to Basement Picasso. Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a little bit of landscape painting. This is the reference picture that I've chosen for today. And what I've got is a background that I've prepared previously with a little bit of random colours and textures just to get me started. So that's the layer I'll be painting on. And then I've brought in a slightly blurred version of this reference photo, which we'll use to be able to pick some of the initial starting colours from to get the picture going. So with that lower layer is the tracing layer, and then this top layer, we can now start to paint on that. So you can see for the initial stage I'm working very quickly here, just randomly blocking out the colours from the underlying painting. What I'm trying to do is let them blend into that original coloured background start that I had, and start to find interesting little colour blends that come from the combination of those two. So once I've got a general sort of very rough sort of blocked background, what we'll do is we'll take the tracing off and we'll now start to look at the colours that we've got on the picture and start to try and find interesting colours to be able to add more of those and bring those colours into the picture now. So at this stage in the painting, you'll notice that I'm generally trying to keep things very loose. I'm using different types of brushes. I'm trying to get marks that are moving around, try and get a bit of energy into the drawing, and just not worrying about details, really just thinking more about sort of general colours and shapes, and trying to find interesting colours kind of coming from the picture as we start to work. So one of the things you'll probably notice is I've not gone too dark with some of the colours. I've kept more to the sort of light and mid tones, and what I want to do now is to use the sort of watercolour washes and just introduce a little bit more of some of the darker colours. Just using the Rebelle watercolour features, so we can put some colour down and then just let this kind of run around the picture and just add a bit more visual interest into what's going on. So now that I've got the basic colours down, the basic sort of composition in place, what I want to do is just start to bring through a bit more of the drawing. What I'll do is go back to the reference drawing. At this point, I've obviously been looking at it, but not been particularly concerned about things being absolutely in the right place. So what I'll do is go back to the reference photo and just look at some positional lines. It'll be effectively a very, very quick, loose sketch. I'm not going to sketch out every rock and pebble in it. All I want to do is just bring in a few proportions, shapes and edges, and then just start to make sure that the drawing's generally sitting in the right sort of position. So in terms of the sketch, you can see how loose that is, but it just allows me to look at where I put things down and just will allow me to move things around and shape things slightly. Before I do that, what I want to do is to integrate the lines a little bit more. So at the moment the black lines kind of jump out a little bit. So the way that I do that is to take the line layer and we lock the alpha transparency. So that means that any paint we put down is only going to go in those lines. And then what I'll start to do is just pick some of the colours from around the image and just use those to paint over the lines. And that way we can sort of integrate them into the painting. And if any of these lines end up actually being in the final image, then they'll sit more effectively because they're not just a black line, they're actually picking up some of the colours. So this is a really good way to be able to integrate the colours in the picture and make your line work much more effective. So you'll see some of the lines I'm doing dark, some of the lines I'm doing light on dark, and once you're happy with what you've been able to put down, then we will drop that layer down and merge it with the layer below, so we can go back to painting on the single layer. So at this point you'll see a lot of very loose scribbly marks going in, just sort of moving paint around, picking up sort of random colours, and what we're trying to do is just to avoid getting too much into detail too quickly. We're still very much at the sort of first pass of the painting. We want to try and keep the energy up, we want to try and keep the mark making going, we want to keep the randomness there, and we want to keep thinking about the picture as a whole, so that it's very tempting to really start to tighten up and start doing edges and details and shapes. At this stage we really want to just keep thinking about the whole picture and the unity of marks and the unity of colours across the surface. So at this point, I've brought in a new layer of some random marks that I've made. These marks were originally made on paper with a brush and then scanned in and then just arranged to give us this kind of random structure. And again, what I've done is locked the transparency of this layer so that I can just paint into these shapes. And I'm actually going to bring back a little bit of colour from the original image to just basically give me some blocks of colours and some random shapes that are going to integrate back into the image. And what this helps to do is, again, just break up the underlying painting, making sure that we're not getting too much into the details just yet, and to allow us to get this sort of layer of random shapes and marks that add a bit more visual interest and something that we can then work with as we kind of move the painting forward. So hopefully you can see once that is all integrated colour-wise that those marks now sort of sit within the picture, and they help to just give a little bit more texture, a little bit more in terms of the shapes that we've added, and just break up the image that we were sort of working towards. So again, just sort of pushing and pulling between adding more detail and getting ever more refined, and being able to go in and try and keep the surface loose and interesting as we continue to work on it. So once we're finished with that, same thing again, we'll drop that layer down and merge it back in so we can carry on working on the painting just on a single layer. And we'll not be tracing from now on. Again, we'll just go back to using the colours. At this point, the picture itself is effectively the palette of colours, and it's all just about really sort of moving those around the painting and using those to try and keep everything harmonious. Okay, so that brings us up to about the first hour of painting. I think that's got a really good first pass. I think that gets a good sort of colour balance. There's lots of interesting marks. There's good general sort of basic structure to the drawing, the painting, without anything getting too fussy or detailed yet. And you'll notice that the entire time that I've been doing that, I've just been working at this scale. I've not zoomed in on any details. I've not been doing any sort of detailed drawing, etc. So this has just been about really establishing that sort of first layer. And you can see we've still got quite a lot of little marks from the original coloured background that we were working on. So some of those have made it through that first pass and just give a little bit of visual colour and interest to kind of complement the sort of slightly more muted colours that we've got from the reference image and that we've been bringing in. So we'll leave it there for just now, and then we'll come back and have a look at it with some fresh eyes and pick up for the next session. So now that I've had a chance to come back to the drawing the next morning, there's a couple of things I'm looking at. So first of all, I've zoomed into the drawing a bit more. This is the first time I'm going to start looking at doing a bit more detail. Most of the first pass was done working off a relatively small reference drawing, just looking more just at general colours and very simple shapes. What I've got set up now is the reference photo and the second screen, the preview image that Rebelle gives you, sitting side by side on the big monitor. So I'm now starting to look at things in a bit more detail, and looking at the reference photo. There's a couple of areas that I want to bring through more colour and more interest that I've not really sort of brought through yet. So the things that I'm noticing are around the shoreline here, we've got some really nice sort of neutral brown grey colours that sort of sit between the colours of the beach and the colours of the water, which I've not really been able to bring through yet. And the shades of blue, my blues are a little bit too green. I'm not really sort of getting the right sort of hue and a little bit more that we can bring through in terms of tone. So there's a section of colours there that I want to try and explore and bring through a little bit more. And in terms of the rocks at the front, so there's a little bit more I want to bring through as far as the contrast is concerned, to bring up the darks and then start to bring out a bit more of the shapes. And then this interaction between the distant hill and these rocks that are sitting in the mid-ground is something that I want to bring through. So in terms of sort of detail and focal point, that's probably the sort of the 3 points of the picture that I want to bring more into to give a sort of triangular sort of set of details that will help your eye move around the picture. I mean, for this kind of scene, there's no strong single focal point. It's a view, and it invites somebody to explore the view. So if we can get something that helps somebody's eye move around the picture, then that's going to help. So to do that, this session, what I'm going to do is bring through some of these colours. So I'll do that again just with a little bit of tracing and cloning to just find some of the colours and help get some of the colour relationships through. And then we'll do another layer of tracing. Again, not a huge amount of detail, but just starting to pick out a few more details and just refine some shapes, bring out a little bit more interest. So with things like the ridge line of the hill, I don't want this complete cutout that we have in the reference material. It's nice where we're starting to get sort of lost and found edges. There's just enough to see the hill, but not that kind of cutout sort of sense. But there are some nice sort of shapes and edges, so it'd be good to try and get a little bit more of that definition without, as I say, ending up with this kind of sort of hard edge all the way along. So things like that I'll try and bring out a bit more. So that's my general plan, and that's usually the way that I sort of try and do things, is to look at the picture, sort of think, what is it I want to try and work on for the next hour or so, and then give myself a little bit of a plan in terms of how to move the picture forward. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the second hour of painting, and I think if we look back and compare where we are at the start of this session and then compared to what we've been able to do, I think that's helped bring out a bit more solidity. It's brought out the sort of colouring that we were looking for, brought a little bit of the sort of focal points together. I think we managed to start to bring through a little bit of detail. This is always one of the challenges as you sort of transition from very loose and sort of abstract marks that you have in the early stages. We start to bring in details. It's the balance of the level of detail versus the marks and abstract shapes that you're leaving. And what you're trying to do is get the right balance between the two, because the two will sort of fight against each other. So if you've got very abstract marks, it's very difficult to get a lot of really intricate detail sitting alongside that. So what we're trying to do is find the right balance between the two. So we'll take a break there, and we'll go away, and then we'll come back and we'll have another look at it and another think about what the next steps are going to be. So now that I've had a chance to look at the picture for a little bit, taking a break, what I want to do is bring back some randomness into the picture. So the way that I'm going to do that is the image that I was using to trace and pick some of the colours from was a blurred version of the photo. And one of the things that does is it reduces the contrast slightly. So what I've done is brought in the original photo now, so that we can see some of the colours and contrasts that are slightly enhanced from that. And then the second thing that I've done is I've brought in a layer of random shapes and marks, which at the moment completely obscure the image, but there's a lot of sort of subtlety and detail in terms of the mark shapes and lines and texts and things. So this is going to help me to really refresh the surface and randomise it, and just get away from where I was getting to towards the end of the last session, which was start to do too much in the way of details and drawing and edges and things. So what I want to do is just try and loosen up a bit and get back to just big shapes and marks. So this layer, what we'll do is make the transparency locked. So we'll do lock transparency in that, and we'll set the photo to be the tracing layer, and you can see that. So we'll make the photo the tracing layer, and then we're going to paint on this layer with the transparency locked. And what we'll do is we'll paint out the shape, but I'm going to use something that's got a little bit of impasto texture to it. So as we do this, it's also going to help bring a bit of sort of surface character and thickness to the paint. So that's what we're going to do, and then we'll start to paint back into it and soften some of those. The other thing I want to work on in this session is just bringing out this sort of central area as the sort of the more of the focal area, and also deal with some of the colours which are, I think, in the midground sitting a little bit too dark. So I want to soften those down and use a little bit subtler colours in the shadows, and maybe just a little bit more of sort of the blue and the greens and browns within that sort of space. So hopefully that's the two main things that I can focus on during this session. So now hopefully you can see, if we have a look at the difference kind of before and after, that's added a huge amount of texture and visual interest, the sort of impasto and thickness. There's little bits of text and marks, and that's hugely randomized the surface, and that gives us a freshness to now go back to starting to paint on top of again, and to bring in the details. And this is part of my process, is sort of working backwards and forwards between adding more details and becoming more realistic, and then randomizing and loosening up the image so that you're constantly sort of pulling and pushing it to try and find something in between, because I don't want something that's completely abstract. I want you to be able to see it and read it and engage with it. But equally, I don't want something that just becomes more and more photorealistic and rendered. And what we're trying to do is to find something that just sits nicely between those two sort of extremes. And I find this process helps me to be able to work towards that. Feels like it's got a slightly better blend in terms of marks and textures, and what I want to do now is just bring a little bit more randomness in terms of some text. So the way that I'm going to do that is to use a stencil that I've made previously that includes some random text on it, and what we'll do is just position that at a reasonable sort of angle. And then once I'm happy with where that's sitting, what we'll do is we will keep the stencils active when hidden, and then hide the stencil from the image. So that lets me see where I'm painting without the stencil obscuring things. But the stencil will still be active, so that will allow me to bring some of that text and colour through into it. So I think we're going to call this one done for just now. I think we've got the painting to a pretty good stage. We could certainly keep working on it and finding more things to add. But I think for this demo, we're going to wrap that up. So hope you found that interesting. Hope you found a few helpful hints and tips. You got any thoughts? Please feel free to leave some comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to see more of these, I'm certainly going to be doing more in the future, so please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.